But the presentation today is called Lifestyle. And what does this have to do with the mind, our brain, our behavior? What role does a healthy lifestyle play in the Christian life? And these are some of the issues we will look closer to today. So let us just start with a prayer. Father in heaven, as we look into this topic about lifestyle, I ask you that you will make it more clear to us why you gave the health message and how you want it applied in our own life, and also help us to share this to other people in the most attractive manner. In Jesus' name, amen. So quite recently, there was a survey, a global Adventist survey, and there were 60,000 Adventists answering all the questions from all the world, and one particular question caught many's interest. And this question is a question we are going to answer right now on your VoxVote app. So this question had to do with the health message, and it read as follows: following the health message ensures my salvation. And probably most of us doesn't have English as a primary language, so the crucial word here is ensures. What does it mean? So basically it means to make certain our salvation, or the health message make sure or secures our salvation. This was a question they wanted an answer to. So now it's our turn, and because before we delve into the topic of lifestyle, it's important that we know its relation to salvation. So if you go to our app, then I will start the voting when you have all found your app and you're ready. So just raise your hand when you're ready to vote, and I will start the process. You have the PIN code 97149. You can either access it through the app or the web page. And the answer that the Adventists around the world provided to this question was so surprising that they asked the pastors and the church leader around the globe to really talk to the church member about the relation between health and salvation. So maybe we will get some interesting results today. If you're all there, I will start the counting. I'm not sure if you can see my page here, but I'm clicking start now, and you will have some 1 minute to answer from now. And you will have several options. You will have 3 or 4 options, I think, and just pick the answer that fits best to your beliefs. So 30 seconds left. $15. And soon the time is finished. Yeah, so unfortunately, I am not able to show the results on the screen for some reason. When I go to my web browser, it doesn't show up on that screen. But I will tell you what you answered. Half of you answered, I strongly agree that health message ensures my salvation. And 14% told they agree. And then there were nobody here are not sure. So they were very sure about either point. So the rest, the half of the group, believes that salvation or the health message does not ensure my salvation. So here there are 2 different views. One very strongly agree that health message ensures my salvation. The other one strongly disagree. And what did the World Church We're back, and you answered very well. And here you see what the World Church voted. And they voted actually much like you do here. You see, half of the church, they believe very strongly that the health message ensures my salvation. But the other half of the church, and the other half of the church, they answered, it does not secure my salvation. And there were some divisional differences. You see some differences, some divisions here. Almost everybody believes that the health message ensures my salvation. This is East Central Africa. Here you have Southeast Asia. Almost all of them believe that the health message ensures my salvation. So in the recent magazine Adventist World, they took up this question and they told the readers what Adventists had voted on this and answered on this question. And the Adventists, this is kind of run from the administration, the GC, and they write here, the Adventist Church does not support the belief that following its health message ensures salvation to any degree. Salvation is a gift from God. The Adventist health message emphasizes physical health, mental health, emotional well-being, social support, and relationships as part of spiritual growth. So pastors and church leaders worldwide should pay more attention to clarifying the relationship between salvation and, among other things, the health message. So if it's not about salvation, what is the health message about then? There are four main reasons why we receive the health message, and one is that the Adventists should be able to serve God as long and effective as possible. And we know this from the research that has been going on. For instance, the blue zones where scientists have studied the population at Loma Linda, and they live longer than most other Westerners' populations that they have discovered or studied. Another important reason is that Adventists should be a good advertisement for our church. In this way, we can attract the public's attention and in a favorable manner. Because today, when people, at least in Europe, think about Christianity, they think about something old-fashioned and something that is not relevant. But if they start to see, like this, it's a newspaper, Los Angeles Times, that write why Loma Linda residents live longer than the rest of us. And they understood somehow that it's related to religion. They treat their body like a temple. So it's a nice point that they catch there. Another important reason is that Adventists might help others, not of our faith, to find the benefits and blessings of good health that we ourselves have received from, spirit of prophecy and biblical principles. So this is what I do myself. I work in this rehabilitation center that you see there in the video, and I feel personally that we help to break down barriers, because we get a lot of secular people to our center, and they see that there are Christians, but still they feel that it's a safe and good place to be. So this can also help a lot to have institutions which are guided by godly principles. But the two last principles have generally had less focus or attention. So one aspect is that Adventists should have sharpened mental perceptions, so they will be better able to understand spiritual as well as secular truth. And the last one is maybe the least mentioned usually, that Adventists should be better enabled to withstand temptations and aid in spiritual growth. And if you go to the spirit of prophecy, she is more balanced and she has a broader view of a health message than I ever thought myself. And I rarely hear people speak about this balanced view that I find in Ellen White's writings. So the first you see here is that it will promote our happiness in this life and aid us in preparation for the life to come if we follow those health principles. And the health message is given for us to provide the highest possible development of mind, soul, and body. So the whole human being is in focus here, not only the physical. And she writes another place, it is an important aid in the work of becoming sanctified through the truth and fitted for immortality. And even you will be you'll be more able to discern temptation and resist them if you follow those health principles. So this is the kind of aspect that we rarely hear about from in the church. And it's not even only good for ourselves. If we follow those health principles, the efforts we do toward others will be more effective. It says here that the impression made upon the hearers would be more marked if we follow those health principles. And she writes also that whatever promotes physical health, and this is what we're going to look at today, promotes also development of a strong mind and a balanced character. So there are more to the health message, and just keeping us live longer is some important aspects that we rarely talk about, that we will look into today. And already in her time, she understood the relationship between the mind and the body. She understood how the mind influences physical health and how physical lifestyle habits can have a positive influence on the mind. So today, my plan was to go through those core lifestyle habits. We probably won't be able to go through all of them because of time limit, but I hope you will find it interesting. So if you came here to hear all the correct answers with double underlinings, or you wanted to hear somebody speak ex cathedra, I think you are not in the right place, because much of the science underlying these aspects of lifestyle and its effect on human health, the evidence is not very strong in all areas, so the evidence is variable. In some areas there are strong evidence, others it's just few studies that have been looked into those specific aspects of lifestyle. But let us start with what most Adventists are most focused on, that's nutrition. And what does different aspects of nutrition do to our mind and our brain? Maybe we'll start with one lifestyle factor which the Bible actually talks specifically about and how it affects our behavior. And that's what you find in Ephesians 5:18. It says there, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. And that last word is so difficult for me, so I had to look it up. And it means that you are excessively indulgent in sensual pleasures, in vice or sinfulness. So it's really bad behavior that alcohol can lead to. Why does alcohol lead to such crazy behavior? There are two aspects here. One is that when you drink alcohol, actually the nerve signals that warns us about doing mistakes is reduced. And there was a study where the authors, they concluded that our study isn't the first to show that alcohol reduces this alarm signal. But contrary to previous studies, their study showed that you are actually aware of those mistakes that you're about to committing, but you don't care about it. That's what they found out in this study. So you may hear both of those good and bad angels sitting on your shoulders, but you don't care. That's one of the effects with alcohol. So alcohol usually increases the risk of committing behavior that are characterized by inner conflict. So, you know, when the people have started drinking alcohol on a bar, he thinks, I should not drink another one, I will not get back home, it's not safe for me. So it's an inner conflict. He wants another drink, but still he thinks it's not so good. But what he ends up doing, more likely, is to take another drink, do something stupid, start fighting, behavior which is characterized by inner conflict. This is what alcohol does, among other things, to our behavior. And they also looked into mental health. So what about, if you want good mental health, should you drink alcohol or should you not drink alcohol? And this year, they actually released a study which told that no alcohol is probably the very best for your mental health. They compared non-drinkers with moderate drinkers and moderate drinkers who stopped drinking alcohol altogether, and saw which of them had better mental health. So what you see here is that non-drinkers had the very best mental health in the beginning of the study, but those who drank moderate intake of alcohol, like 1 to 2 glasses of wine every day, they increased their mental health when they stopped drinking altogether. And we know that if you have a high alcohol intake, chronically high alcohol intake is really damaging a part of your brain that is responsible for your frontal lobe, controlling your baser passions and emotions, particularly the serotonergic part of your brain. The connections that go from your frontal lobe to those baser centers in the lower part of the brain, these connections don't work so well. So this nerve system, the effect of this nerve system is reduced by 50% within a few years of high alcohol intake, and it comes more rapidly for women. Men, it takes a longer time before their nervous system is damaged. So alcohol is really not something to drink if you want a sharp brain and good mental health. What about nutrition, food? Does that affect mental health? And I won't go into many things here. I just want to mention maybe the most interesting thing that happened in 2019, at least so far, when it comes to nutrition and how it has been shown to affect mental health. So this is a study. This is not a regular study. It is an analysis of all the previous intervention studies which tried to assess the effect of dietary intervention on depressive symptoms. So this was not a study on depressive person per se, but it measured their depressive symptoms in non-depressed patients. So you can have depressive symptoms without qualifying as having depression. But what I found here is that if you do nutritional intervention, you have actually significant reduced depressive symptoms when you do changes in diet. All these studies were not doing the same intervention. So what did they do? You see here that there were mainly 3 approaches. Very common approach was to increase fruit and vegetables intake, and also fish, and they reduced meat intake, animal fat, and processed food in many studies, and also some studies were mostly focused on weight reduction. And what I found was that it was a significant drop in depressive symptoms when they switched diet to this type of approaches. So this is maybe the most robust findings we have today when it comes to showing the effect on nutrition on depressive symptoms. Are there other ways of eating which can negatively affect your mental health? This is a study on low-carb diet, and it's really low. It's 10 to 20 grams carbohydrates a day, and that's really the most extreme that goes to this type of diet, low-carb diet. So this is a study where they had a weight reduction program, but they had different types of foods. They had low fat, and that means a lot of carbs, and they had low carb diet. And what you see here is that the black round dots represents the low-carb group. And what you see here, they scored higher after 1 year. They scored higher on depression, anxiety, anger, hostility, anxiety. They were more fatigued, they had less vigor, they were more confused, and they had more total mood disturbance. So this seems kind of interesting. And this is the only study so far which has gone into this area. There have been done many short-term studies, but this is the only long-term study on the effects of diet, different low-carb diets and regular diets on mental health. And I think much of it has to do with the carbohydrates, that they are facilitating a good level of concentration of serotonin in the brain. Because in order to get serotonin in the brain, you need to have tryptophan, but you not only need that, you need insulin, and that you get from diet with a lot of carbs in it. So this may be one of the reasons. And when we are speaking about tryptophan, which is found in amino acid, I will just mention another aspect of human health and human behavior. Because usually we think that our own behavior is something we decide fully on our own. We are not influenced by so many other things. We just decide what we want to do. But this is a fascinating study. They had 2 groups. One of the groups got 1 gram of tryptophan. That is a little bit more than what you usually are able to eat in a day in regular foods. The other group got a placebo, and then both groups were taken into a room where they asked do you want to donate to this organization, Amnesty International, Greenpeace, World Wildlife Foundation, or UNICEF? Oh yes, all wanted to donate, but the one who got tryptophan, they wanted to donate even more. They donated double the amount than the other one. So what in the world is going on here? So what you put into your mouth, can that actually affect such behaviors? So I hope I didn't give you an idea what to feed your family and relatives around birthday time and Christmas, but it's interesting that this is actually taking place on this small study, but there are other studies that support this effect. Caffeine is a hotly debated topic, even more lately in the church, and just mention briefly about the acute effects, because caffeine is often used for cognitive performance and increased alertness. That's why people drink it in the morning. But studies, they suggest that the acute effects of caffeine are mostly due to reversal of adverse withdrawal effects. So the person who drinks coffee, they don't drink it in the evening, and then they have stayed all overnight. And when they wake up in the morning, they're actually in a kind of abstinence phase, early abstinence phase. So you see here, caffeine drinkers who wake up, they have much higher drowsiness, they are more tired than non-drinkers in the morning. So what happened when the caffeine drinkers take their first cup of coffee in the morning? Well, yes, the drowsiness reduces, but only to the level of the non-drinkers. So they don't get additional alertness by drinking coffee, they just get back to normal. When caffeine drinkers wake up in the morning, they are less alert and more tense. So caffeine is just a shortcut or a way of treating symptoms. It's not dealing with the underlying issues here. So in my workplace, we don't serve caffeine. So people who come to us, usually the first few days, they have headaches, and they start to realize that they're actually dependent on some substance. And many get the kind of aha moment where they think, should I really do something to my body that makes me dependent on it? So maybe the best is not to use caffeine. Stress, those who attended Dr. Binus' workshop yesterday will recognize a lot of what I'm going to say here. But, this is about sleep. We will come to stress later. Sleep is important, and it's important also for the physical part of health, but also mental health and cognitive function. It increases creativity, memory, and it stimulates higher functions compared to lack of sleep. And if you are sleeping poorly in general, you will have a higher increase for risk for depression and anxiety. And if you have those conditions already, anxiety and depression, this will also likely increase in symptoms if your sleep is poor. So it's good to work to have a good sleep. Also, if you are awake for like 18-24 hours, you start to have the same poor driving skills that people who are drunk. You know, the blood alcohol concentration in most European countries should be below 0.05, or else you will get in trouble with the police. But the same reduced in driving skills happens when you are awake for 18 to 24 hours. What happens more when you don't sleep? Actually, just a few hours of lack of sleep can make you more angry and irritable, and this has much to do with your brain's ability to control your more primitive areas of the brain. And they talk about the day after effect. So if there is a couple and one of them have slept poorly, the day after there will be more quarreling in that relationship. But you also have the day before effect, where quarreling before you go to bed, you know, that will probably give you bad sleep. And then you can come into a vicious cycle. So relationship can suffer because of lack of sleep. And we know that children who sleep poorly in their preschool years, they can develop different types of social and emotional problems later in school years. So for children, they have different types of sleep lengths that is recommended. For adults, it's about 7-8 hours. And actually, if you sleep poorly, you can start to be thinking more stereotypical, and you can be more prejudiced than if you have good sleep. So you see how lack of sleep can influence your way of thinking to more primitive ways of behavior and thinking. And you have more difficult to analyze other people's emotions, and you have reduced empathy. That is one of the effects behind the day after effect, when there are more quarreling in the relationships. What happens at work if you don't sleep so well? You are more likely to exploit others, leaving early at work, more violence and cheating, and you are more hostile without knowing or being aware of it. And as the man to the right here, you react with greater frustration if you are interrupted or something at work happens that you didn't want, or suddenly you got some problems like with the computer. It's more likely that you will burst out in some kind of frustration. Yeah, it's a very old one. So again, it's about the frontal lobe having control over the baser areas of the brain. So many of those lifestyle factors, if you do them well, you will strengthen your frontal lobe. And I think that is one of the main reasons why God wants us to live healthy. Stress, that was what was mentioned yesterday. We all need some type of stress in good terms. We know that when we have some stress, if we don't have any demand on us, we will not perform very well, at least not at work. So the more stress you have, the better it is to a certain point, a tipping point. When you go beyond there, you start to break down, and that's where all the negative effects sets in, both mentally, cognitive function starts to deteriorate, you lose memory, attention, learning ability, and also you start to have behavioral effects that you already saw on the previous slide: hostility, frustration, anger, all those things that happens when your frontal lobe shuts down. They even did, probably some of you are students, so they followed some students in their exam preparation, and they saw that those students who prepared for exams, they developed reduced willpower, they reduced emotional control, they increased bad behavior like tobacco, caffeine, unhealthy eating. So many things deteriorated during exam preparation. So what is actually happening inside the brain? So this was the illustration that you saw yesterday if you went to Dr. Binu's workshop. This is just from a new article, but by the same author. So it's a little bit more graphic here. So what you see here is that the frontal lobe has connection to the deeper brain structures, amygdala, hypothalamus, striatum, and you see what they are involved with here. So in a non-stressed state, you are mostly able to exercise power or control over your emotions and impulses and so on, and that has to do with a balance of neurotransmitters inside your brain. But when you get stressed, the alarm clock rings, something happens. What happens on a molecular level is that dopamine and noradrenaline is being released here and sent into the brain, and that causes some nerves to shut down, and those are the nerves which connects the frontal lobe with those baser structures here. So it reduces the connection, but it also strengthens the activity of your baser areas of the brain. So not only does the frontal lobe shut down, but those other structures in the brain, they act more lively. So you will have a really hard time if you're exposed to uncontrolled stress. That's the most damaging in this situation. So which factor can you focus on in order to have improved frontal lobe functioning? We know that chronic stress, if you're exposed to stress over a long time, there will be structural changes in your brain. And those changes include increase of this alarm central, it will increase, and also you will have less and less gray matter. The frontal lobe will actually shrink when you have chronic stress over a long time. And lack of sleep is one of these things which can influence negatively this relationship. Anxiety, depression, PTSD, they also find the same detrimental effects. Alcohol reduces various connections here. After some years, this connection is really doing very bad, and possibly also caffeine, at least high intake of caffeine, can possibly do the same negative effects. So what should you focus on doing? We know that physical activity is helping the frontal lobe to exert control over those baser structures in the brain. Sunlight, we will have a look at in a few minutes, not outside, but here. And also oxytocin, that is especially increase in oxytocin, which you get in close relationship, empathy, volunteering for others. Then we see that oxytocin is increasing. And another thing, that is exposure. Regular exposure to mild stress is actually building up the frontal lobe's ability to control the baser parts of the brain. Well, we will not listen to Johann Sebastian Bach this time, but we don't have time. But one of my teachers, I studied Master of Public Health at Loma Linda, and one of our teachers were this man, and he's one of the leading authorities on the connection between humor and health, Dr. Lee Burke, and he did some interesting studies. He's played such funny videos, and he measured the stress hormones before and after they watched the video. And what they found was this, that the stress level had been reduced quite a lot by just laughing and watching these funny videos. So he says to us doctors, it's no joke, we need to start prescribing humor as medication. You should laugh 3 times a day for 2 weeks and then you will feel better. So it's actually something true with that. We can also get into nature, and they found that about 30 minutes is like the ideal time for you. You get the most for the minutes you are outside, if you stay there 30 minutes, according to stress reduction. Physical activity, that is often mentioned for physical health, but we will skip this part, and I would like to go to sunlight. You will be able to have this presentation afterwards, so don't panic. It will be sent to you or be available for you, and it's very well described, and you also have the references to all the studies that is provided here. But sunlight I found particularly interesting. We know that we call this generation the indoor generation because we spend 90% of our life indoors. So that's not a good idea, but that's how Western life is structured. And we know that sunlight can be used for treatment of several mental conditions. But what I find interesting is that if you go to, for instance, anxiety, then you again see this structure here. So what does sunlight do with the connection between frontal lobe and the baser part of the brain? So what they did, it was a Danish study, I think, and they had people having light for 30 minutes every morning for 3 weeks. And what they found was that the brain's ability to control the fear center improved. So there were more stronger connection from the frontal lobe going down to the fear center. And the more intense the light, the more positive effect. So the authors, they concluded that light affected the communication between the frontal lobe and the fear center, amygdala, in the brain. So this is a kind of interesting thing. So it can be used for treating anxiety symptoms. And what are the mechanisms? Is it the light itself? Is it other things? We don't really know. But one of the things could be vitamin D. We know that vitamin D is acting much like some of our common antidepressants. It is increasing serotonin. It acts as, if there are any doctors here, it acts like an SSRI. It reduces the reuptake of serotonin to this axon here, and it also reduces degradation. Another class of antidepressants are MAOI, which reduces metabolism of serotonin. So vitamin D has some interesting effects on this system of the brain. Another study they did was to, some of the studies have really interesting headlines. Don't you think this is interesting? In broad daylight, we trust in God, brightness, the salience of morality and ethical behavior. So what did they do here? Well, they did 4 or 5 lab experiments. First, they did something called dictator game. It means that there are 2 people, and one of them are given an amount of money, and he should divide it equally with the other person. But usually that is not what is happening. Usually the one who received the money keeps 60% in general, and the other one gets under 40. But when they were exposed to more light, the person became more righteous. He gave more equally amount than he divided in 2, and the other one got as much as himself. When there was more light in the room, and they also were more likely to return undeserved money. So they found money, they had hidden money someplace, and when they found them, if they were in more light condition, they were more likely to hand back that kind of money. And another study, they were asked to volunteer. They were going to code some papers, which took time, was very boring, but the more light they were in, the longer they endured in this activity. And the last one, they even donated more money. So you remember the other study where they got tryptophan and donated more money? When they were in more light, they donated more money. And here you see the actual lightning intensity. So the ones who were in this room, they donated 19 Taiwanese dollar. I don't know how much that is, but when it was more light, they donated 29. And those in the most lighted room donated $41. So kind of interesting. And they even did some studies where they saw that being in light promotes reflection instead of impulsivity. And brightness facilitates automatic inhibition of desires and impulses. So if you want to be more reflective and less impulsive, if you want effortless self-control, that is kind of an oxymoron. Self-control is really something you usually have to work hard for. But if you want automatic, effortless self-control, maybe you should try to be in the light or in the sunlight more. It can actually give some interesting effects. So there is one verse in 1 John 7. If we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, purifies us from all sin. And note this fellowship with one another if you walk in the spiritual light. That is true. But it's even some truth if you walk in the physical light. We saw here that if you are exposed to light, you are more likely to act pro-social. You are less selfish. You are inclined to volunteer and help others more. You are less likely to steal, improved self-control, have less fear and anxiety. So it's kind of interesting how God let us find that there is actually some truth to what he says is spiritual truth. We can find some reflection of it in the physical type. The last 2 minutes, I will just mention what can happen if you do a broad, intensive lifestyle change. What can happen on your cognitive function? And today, in the Western world, there are more and more people developing this type of disease, Alzheimer's and dementia, and there is no effective cure. So that's why it's one of the most feared diseases in my country among middle-aged people. And it's the second most common cause of death in Norway. And usually we divide this disease in 3 stages. You have usually mild cognitive impairment preceding development of Alzheimer. And there is one type of gene which is really, people are fearing if they have this type of gene, is ApoE4. And I did the test myself. What genes do I have? I was lucky I didn't have the ones. E3 is neutral, E2 is preventive towards Alzheimer, but if you have E4 and double E4, then you are really at high risk for getting Alzheimer. And this is a disease which has many different risk factors and way of running. So they have not been able to find a pill that can actually prevent or treat this disease effectively. That's why they have been looking more and more to lifestyle. What can lifestyle do to the brain? So in 2017, there was a study in a major medical journal that told that about 30% of Alzheimer's could be prevented. And here are some preventive strategies. So you see that exercise is a central part, a healthy diet, and reduce depression. And you see many lifestyle factors that is possible to emphasize on in order to prevent this disease from beginning or developing. So they've just done a few major studies when it comes to prevention. The finger study from Finland, they found that if you do both exercise, diet, cognitive training, vascular risk monitoring, emphasize on those issues, they found that you can actually improve and prevent cognitive decline in the elderly. So this was one of the first interesting findings. And then they have done some studies on the MIND diet. That is a combination of a diet called the DASH diet, dietary approach to stop hypertension, and a Mediterranean diet. So it's very close to an Adventist plant-based diet, and they emphasize on food components that have been shown more clearly to prevent and optimize cognitive function, like green leafy vegetables and blueberries and other berries. What you see here, that those who follow this type of diet, the most adherent, after 10 years, they had better or slower decline of cognitive function than those who followed this diet very poorly. So this diet alone seems to have some preventive and positive effects. The last slide is about what can you do if you already have developed cognitive decline, Alzheimer, especially if you develop this pre-stage to Alzheimer. And what you see here is the first study that shows reversal of cognitive decline, and this is a case study of 100 patients. Case studies are not really the best studies to prove some effect. So these are usually the first studies that is published on an issue. So what did they find? They published a finding from 100 patients, and they saw that many of those people, they improved their cognitive functioning. For instance, this old lady here, she was an old physician, and she had memory decline for many years and problem with finding words, and it just accelerated the last year, and she came to this doctor and asked, what can I do? She had trouble navigating and named her pets after the family members and vice versa. She had really troubles with the name. And they did some MRIs and some testing, and they found that they had reduced glucose utilization, the atrophy in the brain, so really some hard findings. And she scored poorly on cognitive testing. So they put her on this program, which is called the MAND program. You will see the content in the next slide. And what she did, she went from the lowest, just 9% scored more purely than her in the beginning of the study. But when she ended this program after 12 months, or she came to 12 months, only 3% in her age scored higher than her. So she had improved a lot when it came to cognitive functioning. And her husband told that her memory had improved from disastrous to just plain lousy, and then finally normal. So you can see that there seems to be some important effect on the cognitive function. And if you have a look at this program that they put the patients on, you will find that it resonates very well with an Adventist healthy lifestyle. And it's also important to do cognitive training, not just eating healthy and exercise and this, but use the mind. And the training for the mind that is most useful, people say, is typical where you use several parts of your brain, not just crossword. This is very one-dimensional way of working with your brain. If you learn a new instrument, you use your hands, 3D, you use your different parts of the brain. So the more parts of the brain you use, the better it is for cognitive training. There are even scientifically evidence-based training methods available if you want to have a look at what types of exercises people are recommended to do. So what I think this lecture has maybe given us is that if you live a healthy lifestyle, you will have a lot of benefits. both among well-being and less stress, better mental health, improved cognitive functioning, more empathy, impulse control, improved ethical behavior, less hostile, and you are less likely to have risk behaviors like alcohol and tobacco intake, gambling, less selfish, and maybe you run the risk of donating more money. So the conclusion here is that the health message is not salvation by sunbathing, sleep, and some jogging. That's not what it is about. It's not a substitute for a new birth. And it's not the gospel, but it is evangelion. It is good news in its own level. And why is it good news? Yeah, it's because it will promote our happiness. It will help us to develop both mind, soul, and body to an optimal level. And it will be an important aid if we follow these principles in the work of becoming sanctified. And we will be more able to discern temptations and resist them, and maybe you have got an idea what this is all about. And if we live a healthy lifestyle, we will have more effect on our approaches to other people. So that's a kind of a different level. So I hope that this lecture has stimulated you to think through your own health behavior, which areas may you improve on, and how can you adopt this in your personal life, but also clinical practice, or if you are a health professional. These are aspects of healthy lifestyle which are often forgotten. So thank you very much for your attention.